So hello everyone, we are going to play another game. This time we are hoping for white pieces. And so far we have been playing 3 games of Botvinnik. We are playing white, and now we are going to play a game that's more of a Vienna type of opening, although we are playing against b6. So the idea is to push to g3 and bishop g2. With the b6 it could be quite different to what we would normally play, and black might want to actually push d5 because he's playing this kind of oven defense setup. But our idea is to definitely play a different type of setup. So knight f6 is reasonable. Since black really is trying to push for the d5 setup, I still feel we will be able to play e5 there, but black would like to then play c5. So it's a question of how to deal with this opening. And my feeling is we are going to go into the end game whenever possible. However, this could work well for black after they push the d5, which is the move that they want to really push for. So what I'm thinking is actually to push with bishop g5. So, I just need to think about how to take back on e4 if d5, d3 is being played, then how to take back on e4. So if I play d3, d5, knight e2, d4, d4, queen d1, king d1, knight g4 is actually very annoying because after king e1, he's got bishop c5, but we have knight to d1. And then we can successfully kick away the knight and play back to the knight goes back. We can play knight c3, and eventually we might need to play f3 as well. So yes, I'm going to play knight e2, and I'm not going to worry about anything here. After d5 we just play d3. If bishop b4 we just castle. So black definitely wants to play d5. We are playing against someone who looks like they are from New Zealand, maybe Australia. Their name is Damon CK 1177. Apologies. So what I want to do here is to demonstrate that the endgame is pretty much playable as well, but I am not sure actually if with knight on c3 is gonna be the case. Because what we would like to achieve here is to have actually knight to one of the knights to be taken. So maybe if d takes e4, we take first with the knight, which will then provoke black to take on e4. We take with the pawn on e4, queen d1, king d1. So the idea is d5, d3, d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, because we are threatening at this point when the knight is here, we are threatening knight f6 and bishop b7. So knight to e4 will have to be played. And after knight takes e4, d takes e4, there's queen d1, king d1. This is like a critical line. But then without this knight here, there's no jump on e4. And if knight c6, we can just simply play c3. And white's position should be okay. Maybe some pushes with the pawn f5 could be problematic slightly, but I don't think so in general that it will be a big problem. So what do we want to play? Maybe taking on d5 is good always for black, so we're not gonna do that. We're definitely gonna play d3. So we are still having the same Vienna setup, even though we are playing against the Owens. Even we are playing against the Owens opening, so we definitely play d3 here. e5 possibly could be considered, but I'm not so good in those pawn structures that then again, actually there is one line as well that slightly bothers me, but it's not so, it's probably okay. It's probably okay. I was just thinking d takes e4, knight takes e4, knight g4. Then I will have to castle. And in f5 they can trade this bishop away. But it should not be a problem. So we spent almost 3 minutes and our opponent is thinking nicely. So also in a previous game we have played someone who spent most of their time, they lost on time. And yes, I would rather, lose on time other than, not to try my best kind of thing. They obviously were, I think, playing in a hopeless position in the end, but yeah, that's a different story. So now bishop b4 doesn't change much because we just simply castle and we never worry about d4 as the knight can go down here. So black is giving us a pair of bishop voluntarily, which is good for us because this bishop can freely roam around his pawns. So there's no necessary, it's not necessary for them to trade the bishop. Also, when you look at their position, the bishop probably was best on e7 rather than, going for some simple tactics from black's perspective. And I'm still thinking, for us it's quite often better if we have more pieces on a board, because that's in general my style as well of playing. So here, if black does not solve the center for us, the central issue for us, then a move like bishop g5 could come with quite a decent threat of e5 pawn. Also, there could be a possibility of playing rook e1 and taking on d5, but black is always being able to take on d5 enough time. We take, he take, take, and queen takes. So taking on d5 and rook e1 is not looking very strong. But bishop g5, e5 might be potentially a nice threat. So d4 is being played, and that's again not a move that will scare us, because right now I feel like we can attack the pawn. Now the question is where the knight goes. So knight can go in some cases on to b1, d2, and f3, but I feel like knight to e2 is good enough at this stage. We can always hit the pawn structure with the move c3, but I'm not sure actually this is the best way to play. It's more a matter of if black is going to decide to play e5 themselves, then we might have some interesting moves. Knight b5 is also option, but it doesn't really work on most moves. Even if I place knight d7, any bishop f4 is going to be met with e5. So it's a question whether the knight would be better on f3 than on e2 to begin with. But knight e2, e5, f4 looks good for us as soon as we play h3 to prevent any jump on g4 to e3. But even that can be considered. So knight e2 and c3 looks right now as a possibility. But c3 I'm also not 100% sure is the best move there. And this is only our move, so from d2 the knight can also go sometimes onto c4 and bother the e5. So I feel like knight to b1 is a more flexible move. I'm not sure what to do with this bishop yet, with the bishop c1. And hitting this pawn chain from with c3 doesn't seem to be making much sense from our perspective. So where is the knight better? Is it better on e2? Is it better on d2? Where does the knight goes from e2? Okay, I think I decided. I decided that the knight is going to be better on b2. On d2, then it's going to be on e2. And the c3 pawn push doesn't seem to make much sense for me now, as there's lots of pressure here, and then I'll be allowing lots of pressure on the d file. We have, however, advantage of two bishops, and e5 is potentially a good move for us, because we can literally go knight d2 and c4. I would also like to go f4 straight away, but first I feel h3 should be played. But then again, does it need to be played? I don't think so. Bishop knight e3, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen e2, queen d4, c3. It looks all right. So the question is, do we play f4 straight away? f4, knight d7 or knight c6 and knight d2. We are going to play f4 straight away. I think this is the type of pawn structure that I would like to have with the pass protected pawn on e4. So therefore f4 is good. And if black ever decides to castle, then we can maybe push on f5, g4 and start the push that way. In that case, knight on e2 would be better than on f3. But again, we just need to wait and see what's going to happen next. So right now I feel that my evaluation of putting the knight on b1 is probably slightly worse than if putting knight on e2, where the e5 pawn, but it has its advantages too, so I don't know. I don't really know what's the best. I'm leaving myself in the dark, but I feel my position is now okay because black really has lost the ability to castle, and I believe knight d2 and c4. Black has lost lots of ability with regards to the bishop pair, so I feel this is giving us a slight edge over them. The question is, black might want to try and castle alongside. So if they're gonna play queen e7, I'm definitely going to start playing on the queen side. And it looks like on queen side, the black pieces could be more safer. And lots of players somewhat instinctively always like to push the h5, h4 pawn. It happens in so many games against me that I'm convinced that they are convinced this is the good place to attack. But usually I have enough pieces on this side. So it's a question. Let me know in the comments as well if the audio has improved over the last couple of days. I appreciate that. There is also a dryer probably sometimes in the background or washing machine, but it's something I cannot really stop at the moment. So queen e7 is a clear indication that black would like to castle long. So we are going to definitely attack with the intent of opening the a file at least, and it also helps our knight to go to c4. Also, anytime the black is going to take on f4, we can also recapture with the g pawn. And this position might turn into like loads and loads of chaos real quick. I also feel that if the king castles long, queen e6 is happening. I was just about to say, that the bishop sometimes might be really nice on h3. I don't see a reason why queen e6 would be played, apart from white wanting to play knight to g4, which I believe would be a big mistake for either bishop h3 or even more so for f5. So I'm definitely going to continue on the king's queen side with the pawn a5, and knight g4 is happening. So Yes, so black would love to jump onto e3, however, I have an intermezzo playing f5. And how is black going to protect his knight on g4? I think this was like a really bad blunder on black's side, because it clearly is losing a knight. And the sad thing is, if you play knight to e3, I take your queen, you take my queen, I take your knight here with a check, and then I'm going to take the knight here. So I'm going to be up 2 knights basically for a pawn. So that's no good. And if I'm up only a knight on its own, it's still pretty much should be game over. But so I think black can maybe play queen h6, but then queen g4 happens. This could be pretty quick game in Vienna. And again, as you can see, there was like lots of tension between e5 and f4, and sometimes, you know, black might fancy some attack on my side, but they might completely mess it up just by trying to bring more pieces into the game. So yes, there's no reason for me to be crying at this point. Quite the opposite. So I think black has just realized that his knight is trapped or gone. Maybe they are analyzing the situation a little bit deeper. However, knight e3, fe6, knight d1, e d7, king d7, rook takes d1, 2 knights up. So it's actually happening. So instead of winning just the knight on g4, for example, after queen h6, queen takes g4, black is deciding to lose 2 pieces. So it's totally lost game for them, even though they were planning to castle long first. But you know, that also did not happen. So we are going to win a pawn here. Oh, sorry, we are winning the full knight. King recaptures. And we are winning another knight. So I could have taken on f7, but there's absolutely no point to prolong this game. If you have a best move, just play it, even if you were thinking of some sort of streaming. Because I see some of the masters are doing it just for the sake of showing off or showing off more lines. But it's obvious if you would be playing against a much weaker player that you know, you're gonna win no matter what kind of mistakes sometimes you're gonna make, unless there are some like very fundamental. So not accepting material for a while might work, but I noticed that if you make some spectacular blunders, this is not gonna get better, you know, throughout the game. So far, yes. Now it's gonna be just repeating myself, you know, to win this game or to win any game where you have extra material, you just can offer a couple of trades and then realize your advantage with the remaining pieces. So now the game has essentially ended, because all we have to do now is just simply to play our best moves and to slowly, you know, keep everything together and slowly trade a couple of pieces. Oftentimes it happens that when you decide to play with less material, like this is almost 5 points of material, then you are not doing yourself any favors. So black is doing exactly that. So we are going to return the rook on the active squares. Now rook belong on the open file, or to support the pawn like so. So king protects the pawn, which is fine. I have recently started reading also a book from Axel Smith about the topic "Pump Up Your Rating," and it's a really nice book to read. Learned some principles as well already from that book. So far nothing new for me, but the principle of pawn majority, it's sort of cleared up one thing for me. It's really useful. So now I can play rook f5. I can play knight to f3. We will. It's not 100% clear how to untangle our pieces, but yeah, I'm thinking of one really strange maneuver of knight c4, if b5, knight a3, b1, and back to d2. It's a very silly maneuver, but it's one of those doable maneuvers. So what I'm gonna do first is knight to c4, attacking the pawn. So the king is obviously hiding, which is reasonable and logical. So now we're going to play bishop d2. The idea is if b5 comes, I can play bishop b4 check, and then there's no more c5. So the b5 happens. So now I'm going to take some space with bishop b4. And I'm also thinking about intermezzo of playing a6 here. King has to move, as there's no c5, would be just another check. And I'm thinking now is the time to ask the bishop the ever so important question. So now if bishop takes, rook takes, pawn takes, we are probably losing a pawn. But it's not such an important pawn for us. So now I was thinking knight to a5, but after bishop takes a6, we don't have any reasonable move afterwards. So where does the knight want to be now? So black has a threat of winning the knight. And we are controlling more squares in the center. I'm just wondering, where do I want my knight? Where do I like my knight? Now also one thing has changed. Now I don't mind to play c3 like I was aware, like I didn't want to play earlier. I would like the knight on d5 at some point, or c6, or c5 actually. And I feel like giving this pawn for knight on c5 is something that I would really enjoy doing. So I won't put my knight onto c5. So I'm going to... Oh, I can actually do it without giving the a6 pawn. Although if I play knight d2, rook e6 comes and black can trade that pawn, but I'm still getting my knight on c5. So I'm gonna play knight d2, and my next move is knight to b3. And I also have now a different target for my play. I would want to play maybe rook a5 and rook a1. Bishop g4 is a move. We cannot deny that. But it's a nothing move, to be honest. The bishop can go here, but it can be kicked away. So we are going after our new targets. So I'm gonna attack here on b5, which I don't want necessarily to capture there. Okay, so now that it becomes closed, I'm also thinking if the knight would be better on b4. The knight has so many nice squares that I don't really know where to keep him. I don't have any concrete plan of play, so first I will restrict the bishop a little bit. We are both on 3 minutes. Okay. So we can push the bishop onto g6, where it's going to be completely stale. And now that the rook is basically trapped here, I will put the rook onto the f file instead, or maybe if we're going to decide to break in the center, then maybe the rook might be good on c1 or d1. But so far I feel like improving my pieces is the most important. So black is trying to break out with f5, but it only opens our bishop here for free and gives us another free pawn on f5. Now also the knight would like to be all of a sudden here. So now the only question is, if I take on c6, I'm actually attacking both of the rooks with bishop c6, so there will be no time to capture on c2. And this is getting more and more not fun for my opponent, so we're gonna take... I remember I played one game in like a really funny event against potential international master, or maybe he was already international master, and I won 2 pieces. But as the time pressure grew, because it was just 5-minute game, I started losing most of those pieces back. And then the gentleman started saying things like, started mocking me a little bit, which is understandable. And in the end said that it was like picking strawberries in the woods. And yeah, I can't blame him either way. It was a game like so. So now the idea is to improve the bishop, then lock him with b4, so I can do any pushes here. It's a sad what happened in this game because we didn't even have time to properly develop our pieces, and the position already completely strayed away from black. And so our ideal move is one of the rooks on the e file, most likely the f rook, attacking the pawn. the knight and the rook protecting any pawn pushes forward, so this is one of the moves that you can do. Rook e8 doesn't protect the e5 pawn, because we can take on d4 with the bishop. Also, we have bishop takes a7. There's nothing left to play for in this game for black, and he finally realizes that and resigns. So I hope you enjoyed this game, even though that was just a simple tactic that decided the game in the middle. And yes, I don't know if this trend continues. I need probably slightly different streaming device so I can play from my mobile. But we will see. We will see what happens next. I'm due to buy something else for the streaming, but I'm not yet decided what it should be. If it's gonna be a computer or some video cam, I'll see. I'm still on the lookout. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's game, and I will see you in the next one. Bye now.